Mike Florio, Pro Football Talk, stopping back by again every single day. You can check him out on the Peacock, NBC Sports on Peacock Fast channel that we used to reside every single day, surfing off of drafting off of Mike Florio and Dan Patrick every single day. How are you doing there, Mike?
Doing great, Rich. How are you today?
I'm doing fine. Right now, I've put my guys Chris Brockman and T.J. Jefferson on the same designation on our depth chart. They're both ones.
Thank you.
So that is just again. I'm just inspired by what Todd Bowles is doing with his quarterback situation right now. Did you see that? You put Baker Mayfield and also Trask.
Mayfield.
What's
and
the order?
Every year, there's something like this. And, of course, they put out the depth chart, and then they say it doesn't mean anything. Well, then why are you putting it out? The league requires them to put it out before the preseason opener. They downplay it. They say a PR person put it together. Well, it's at least some educated idea of where things stand, and obviously they don't want to tip their hand as to whether it's going to be Mayfield or Trask starting Week 1. The key, I think, is going to be the third preseason game. Bowles has been asked about that before, which guy's going to start that one. That's going to go a long way toward letting us know who's going to be the Week 1 starter, and that's the bottom line. At some point, you got to get one of these guys ready. And the longer you dilute the reps, the harder it is for the guy who's going to have the job to be fully prepared for it.
Well, I just thought to myself, with a bye week at Week 5, if Mayfield's son, for some reason, doesn't perform well enough in the first 4 weeks and things are really taking on water, that's when you go with Trask after a bye. And if that doesn't happen, then bye-bye to everybody. And in comes Caleb Williams' attempts, and then damn the torpedoes, as opposed to starting Trask and having Baker come in there and hold a clipboard, which is, I think, the demoralizing way to go. I just don't see that happening, Mike.
Yeah, he picked his shot in Tampa, and he took a very, very low-dollar contract. The Ravens reportedly were interested in him. That was back when Baltimore didn't know what was going to happen with Lamar Jackson. And if Baker Mayfield loses this competition with Kyle Trask, now look, Trask was brought in ostensibly to be the guy who takes over when Tom Brady goes, and now Tom Brady's gone. Why would you need Baker Mayfield if Trask is developing the way you want? I think the fact they signed Mayfield was interpreted by many as an indication that maybe Trask isn't what they need him to be. And if Trask is winning this thing, it's just not a good sign for Mayfield. And you're right, too. Anytime there's a protracted competition like this, more often than not, the guy that wins it simply wins the right to be the first guy benched. It didn't happen last year with Geno Smith and Drew Lock because Smith was great from the start of the season and never let up. But if you struggle, if you're teetering toward being out of playoff contention, if it's just time to see what the other guy can do, that guy that started the season number 2 is going to get a chance at some point, sooner or later.
So what are you hearing about the quarterback scenario in San Francisco and the ordering of the depth chart there, Mike?
Well, clearly Brock Purdy's the starter if he's healthy. And all indications are he's healthy. Now, they're not using him every single day. They're giving him time off. They're letting him ease into it. But anytime anyone is asked about Purdy, the response is positive and glowing, and Purdy is saying all the right things. The question becomes, is it Sam Darnold or Trey Lance is number 2? And 49ers fans get curiously upset when I say it sure seems to me like Darnold's going to be number 2. When you look at all the glowing things that Kyle Shanahan says about Darnold, it started in the offseason. They were putting out the word that he's the most talented thrower of the football that the 49ers have perhaps ever had at quarterback. And there were some comments from Shanahan to Mike Silver, now with the San Francisco Chronicle, that kind of compared, while saying, I don't want to compare him to Steve Young, why can't he be another Steve Young? So I think it's going to go Purdy, Darnold, Lance when it's all said and done, but they're going to keep all 3 of them because last year they needed QB3 by the time they got into December. And if any team is cursed at the quarterback position, it's the 49ers. And if any team needs to have 3 that they feel good about, and I think at one point Shanahan was talking about keeping 4 on the 53-man roster, the 49ers are the team that needs more quarterbacks, not fewer.
And I know, I get the same thing whenever I say anything about Trey Lance on the old social media machine, and I understand, if there's anybody who understands fans' comments on subject matters, it would be you, Mike, but I don't understand the sensitivity about that because I'm not trying to stir anything up. And the stirring up normally would be, well, if this guy craps out, then the coach and the general manager who drafted him would be in trouble. But that is the furthest thing from the absolute truth with San Francisco. And if Lance doesn't work out there, then, I had Daniel Jeremiah on yesterday say, he said, this has no insider information, just looking at rosters and looking the way things work out. He goes, if it doesn't work out for Lance in San Francisco, Atlanta would be a nice landing spot if Desmond Ridder doesn't pan out. I don't understand the sensitivity on the subject matter here, Mike.
I don't get it either. I think part of it is there are plenty of people who use their voice on social media but don't otherwise use their eyes and ears to listen and hear what's being said and aren't following it as closely as you and I do, so they're stunned by the idea that Trey Lance would fall behind the guy who was seeing ghosts against the Patriots on Monday Night Football and the guy that we just assume is done because it failed for him in his first couple of starts, and look at everything they gave up to get Lance. There's a certain organizational pride that goes into seeing Lance thrive, and you don't want to admit that your team screwed up, but they did. And they balanced it out by getting Brock Purdy with the last pick in the draft the next year.
Yeah.
It's not like they're walking around saying, oh, woe is us, we made a horrible mistake with Trey Lance, but they did make a horrible mistake with Trey Lance, and that's okay. You can't wallow in it. You just move on. And I think the main reason he's still on the roster is, as a third overall pick, the slotted rookie contract, as veteran backup contracts go for quarterbacks, this is a pretty good deal to keep him around at that number. They know they need 3. They would trade him if someone blew them away. Let's say there's another Teddy Bridgewater torn ACL like what happened late August of 2016, and someone comes calling with a 1 and a 4 like the Vikings did for Sam Bradford when they were desperate to replace Bridgewater, then I would think they would consider it. But they know they need to have him around. He's inexpensive, and he's got 2 more years before he just walks away as a free agent. And I fully anticipate that to happen unless they do trade him maybe next year in the final year of his contract.
Mike Florio, Pro Football Talk here on the Rich Eisen Show. Jonathan Taylor getting work on his ankle. Is that the same way that Rodney Dangerfield needed work on his arm? Or what's going on?
Oh, my arm. It's broken.
What's happening there?
Yeah, the ankle got injured last year, and he had surgery. And then we had that dust up a week and a half ago about the possibility of him moving from the physically unable to perform list to the non-football injury list, the ankle that is clearly a football injury, the back that was supposedly injured while he was working out, getting ready for the season. The best news for the Colts has been that everything has died down the last week and a half. And this is the first new item as it relates to Taylor since the last back and forth with Taylor saying he didn't have a back injury, and someone from the Colts, probably Jim Irsay, being the one telling the reporters, multiple reporters, that they might put him on NFI and then reserve the right to not pay his salary. So they're hoping, and I said this last Thursday night on the pregame show for the Hall of Fame game, they're hoping that this all settles down and they want Taylor to be on the team over the long term. They just don't know what form that takes. And I think they want to reserve the right to go year to year. Rookie contract finishes this year, franchise tag next year, franchise tag the year after. The numbers are very favorable for the team in lieu of a long-term deal that would pay him a lot of money because teams just don't want to do that with running backs anymore. So they just want him to get healthy, to abandon his desire to be traded, and to realize he's in checkmate. That's the reality with most of these running backs. It's a bad system, but it puts them in checkmate. Saquon Barkley was in checkmate. Jonathan Taylor is in checkmate. Josh Jacobs is in checkmate, but he doesn't care. The system is bad. The teams have the upper hand, and Taylor, the Colts hope, is going to accept that and go out and play football this year, have a big season, and then they'll decide what to do after the year ends.
Well, I mean, again, Daniel Jeremiah said if there's anybody who's, has leverage at the running back spot, he did say it's Jonathan Taylor, that the rest of the offense, that there's nothing else really out there that would scare you, although Anthony Richardson might, show that he can do that. Zach Moss got hurt too. So it's just one of those many issues as to what somebody realizes is checkmate or not. There's Zack Martin as well right now in Cowboys camp. Is there anybody out there, do you think, that might actually take this into a season? Do you think?
I don't think so, but we can say that and then somebody does it. There's a knee-jerk reaction among many in the media to say, "Oh, they're never going to miss game checks." Sometimes they do. Sometimes they will. Now with Taylor, he has leverage, but the problem is when he showed up for camp, that dramatically undermined his ability to use his leverage. Chris Jones of the Chiefs and Zack Martin of the Cowboys did the smart thing, staying away. Now, you've got some significant daily non-waivable fines since they're both on their second contracts. Taylor could have held out at $40,000 a day, and it could have been waivable since he's under his first contract. And you know what? Maybe if you flip year 2 and year 3 for Taylor, if his most recent performance had been 1,811 rushing yards and 20 total touchdowns, he would have held out. Because I think that's one of the keys. When you understand it's a bad system for running backs, what you need to do is have a big third season and then make your play for your contract. Whether the team gives it to you like the Panthers did for Christian McCaffrey after he finished his third season being the third guy ever to have more than 1,000 rushing yards and receiving yards in the same campaign, or it's Ezekiel Elliott who holds out deep into training camp and gets a great contract from the Cowboys. Taylor just shouldn't have shown up if it was going to be ugly like this. So that would have put more pressure on the team to do something to get him in there. They hold all the cards now that he's there. He's limited in what he can do once he shows up for training camp. So I said this from the get-go. I said this the moment Jim Irsay took to Twitter and started launching Scud missiles about the running back position generally. Taylor should have never shown up.
Mike Florio here on the Rich Eisen Show from Pro Football Talk, as well as NBC Sports on Peacock every single day. So what is the story that we're not talking about? What are you hearing from people when you got your ear to the ground of what everyone is discussing that we need to talk about more? Mike, how about that one? I went real macro on you.
There were some interesting comments recently from Jamar Chase of the Bengals about his preference that Joe Burrow stay out until he's completely healthy. And the headline was, Chase says miss week 1 if you have to. But when you look closer at what he said something about, like, as long as he's back after week 5, we'll be fine. And it makes me wonder, what does he know about the chatter in the building about how long Burrow's going to be out? And if he would miss the first 5 weeks of the season, what does that do to the Bengals' chances? I mean, Chase seems to think, oh, we'll be fine, but yeah, you got 12 games left. You're in a tough conference, tough division. You go 1-4 or 2-3 the first 5 games. I don't know what kind of hole the Bengals are going to dig for themselves. It depends on what everyone else does. But that's a concern, and there's been so much quiet about Burrow and his calf and his contract and several weeks. What does several weeks mean? Zack Taylor said several weeks means several weeks. Well, thanks, Captain Obvious. But what is it that Burrow is going to miss, and when will he be back, and how good will he be when he comes back? Week 1 last year, after he missed time after an appendectomy, he had 5 interceptions against the Steelers. So that's one that, when you look at how many great teams there are in the AFC and we just assume the Bengals are going to be in the mix, that's one that is just odd, and it's just kind of been forgotten. Like, that's a big deal. One of the best quarterbacks in the NFL isn't healthy right now, and we don't know when he's going to be healthy, and there's a chance he may miss time into the regular season.
Yeah, I mean, when he said that, I just, again, when Burrow went down, and they're saying it's a calf injury and it's several weeks, that's what Zack Taylor said. And I just thought to myself of Kevin Durant. I don't know why. It's just the most famous calf injury that turned into an Achilles. And I thought to myself, they better now than obviously week 2, when then the season drones on and a 6 to 10 week thing, right? Normally when somebody's out 4 to 6, you say 4 to 6, but the several weeks designation for me was an interesting choice by Zack Taylor. And I guess Jamar's saying, we started 0-2 and we made it to the AFC Championship game last year. We could do it again if it's a 1-3, or even you said 2-3 start. That's the way I looked at it, and that maybe just take 10 weeks off. It would be 6 weeks from the injury if he comes back week 1. And then the Cincinnati Bengals take 10 weeks off and hope Trevor Siemian with everyone else can wing it around well enough to get through it. Now, certainly, if you're not ready in week 1, Myles Garrett is the one who's showing up in week 1. So, he's going to Myles Garrett's building. That might not be the spot to give it a whirl, Mike? That's the way I looked at it.
The thing about the soft tissue injuries, you think they're healthy, and then you go out and you accelerate to your full capacity, and you find out it's not healthy, and it grabs and it sets back. And he had a sleeve on that leg in the first place. That surely wasn't a fashion statement by Joe Burrow the day that he pulled up and hopped around on one leg after he injured the calf. And, you mentioned the Achilles. They're all kind of tied together. Like, we don't know what's really going on. They have no obligation to tell us anything. They don't even have to tell us several weeks. They could have said, we have no comment. You'll see our week 1 injury report. That's all they have to disclose. There is no injury disclosure obligation of any kind in the preseason. The first time we'll hear anything officially from the Bengals, Wednesday of week 1, as they're getting ready to play the Browns. Yeah. And it'll be as simple as he practiced, he didn't practice, or he was limited in practice, and then we'll get the designation on Friday of out, doubtful, or questionable if there's a possibility that he'll go. And that's it. That's all we're entitled to. So I'm kind of surprised they said anything, but you're right. Several weeks, who the hell knows? And when you get that whole calf and Achilles thing tied together, who the hell knows? And that's the thing. And this all started because what aren't we paying attention to? I feel like we're not nearly paying enough attention to that.
Mike Florio, a couple minutes left with our friend from Pro Football Talk here on the Rich Eisen Show. Which rookie are you hearing the most about? Like, hey, watch out for this kid. He's dominating. He's doing this. He's doing that. Which one is lighting up your text and your phone more than anything else?
Well, there's a lot of fascination about Anthony Richardson. I think the Jonathan Taylor situation kind of overshadows that Richardson is the guy with the highest ceiling. Of any of the guys taken at quarterback in this year's draft, he's the one that can be the superstar. And Chris Ballard, the GM of the Colts, has said it bluntly. If he ends up being the star, I don't want to be in the star for somebody else. I'd rather be wrong about him being a star and having him bust on my team. And I'm paraphrasing, but that's the message. I'd rather draft him and be wrong one way than pass on him and have him become that superstar. And I really do think the Seahawks would have taken him at number 5 if he'd have been there. I really do believe that. I was hearing that before the draft. But the Colts get him at 4, and he's got that high ceiling, and let's see what he can do. And, the other thing, too, and we were talking about this yesterday on PFT Live, I feel bad for Bryce Young because he's just in a tough spot. When you think of everything the Panthers gave up to get him, that puts extra pressure on me. He's the number 1 overall pick. They make this huge sacrifice to get him. They give up receiver DJ Moore. They're going to start him right away. I just want people to be patient with Bryce Young. Don't expect him to walk right through the door and have the same impact Cam Newton did right away. It could take time, but they really have. And I wonder how much teams think about this. They really have put him in a tough spot, not just by making him the first overall pick, but by moving up there and making him this focal point, the face of the franchise. And he's never done anything in the NFL, and I hope he gets a chance to really settle in and perform, and people don't put more pressure on him than the situation already does.
What about C.J. Stroud? I mean, he's in an interesting spot as well. He's going to start the preseason. He's going to start. I mean, Houston's going to throw him out there, and their first game's at Baltimore at the bank. Good luck. That's going to be a rough one.
But I think he's in a great spot, Rich, because nobody expects anything from the Texans. So in turn, who really expects anything from him? I feel like he's playing with house money. With Bryce Young, when you consider how wide open the NFC South is, and it's as wide open really as any division as I can remember. Any of those 4 teams can win it. Last year, the Buccaneers were 8-9, and the other 3 teams were all 7-10. And the Panthers have a pretty good team. There's a lot of pressure on Young. With the Texans, they're the one team. If you had to pick one team in the AFC that has no chance of making the playoffs this year, and watch, they'll make the playoffs and get to the Super Bowl, but the Texans would be the team that most people would say, yeah, they got no chance. And then maybe the next team out would be the Raiders. But the Texans are the one team that they've been so dysfunctional lately. Stroud, whatever Stroud does, who cares? What did we expect? What kind of a team does he have around him? So he's actually in a position to maybe surprise us because we don't expect anything from him. And he could get off to a good start and lay the foundation for the Texans to become contenders maybe as soon as next year. Who knows?
So, again, just to bring it all full circle here, you think week 1 we'll see Jonathan Taylor with the Colts and Josh Jacobs with the Raiders and Zack Martin with the Cowboys. And, I mean, again, Jonathan Taylor's left the facility, to rehab and on his ankle off sites, even though, Coach Steichen's saying, hey, we knew about it, so he's rehabbing. I mean, that's weird, man. There's just no other way other than to say that, he's holding out without saying it. So you think this is going to eventually just land with everybody's in because they just want to make their money? That's what you're saying.
I'd like to think they'll figure it out with Taylor. Now, if he's truly injured, he still makes his money, but he doesn't play. And that's one of the realities here, too. If you want to play football, And I think teams use that against players. They use their love of the game, their love of competition, their desire to play against them, whether it's big picture with the NFLPA or individually. Hey, you ultimately want to play football. Let's go play football. So I think of the guys you mentioned, yeah, look, I'd like to think Taylor will be there, but who knows? Zack Martin seems pretty damn dug in and stubborn, and Jerry Jones, we know how stubborn he is.
Yeah.
Who knows what happens there? I think Chris Jones will get a deal done with the Chiefs before the season starts. You mentioned Josh Jacobs, though. That's one we haven't talked about. Look, he's got that $10.1 million franchise tender. And I think when I look, and I know that some of the people cover the team will disagree with me, but when I look at the big picture and how this is all played out, I think the Raiders possibly are pointing toward, just before the season, removing the franchise tender from Josh Jacobs and saying, good luck getting paid when the rosters are set, the money's been spent, and the season is upon us, and then Josh Jacobs is going to be stuck. If I were him, I'd take that 10-1. I'd accept that I'm in checkmate, and I'd take that 10-1 because at this point you're not getting 10-1 from anyone else. But he's so upset about what the Raiders have done to him by not picking up his fifth-year option, forcing him to have a big year, and then using the franchise tag instead of giving him a new contract. It's a matter of principle for him. He doesn't care about the money. And I just wonder if he lingers too long in not showing up, do the Raiders wake up one day and say, we'll just take that $10.1 million and we'll spend it elsewhere, and we'll go with Zamir White or sign Dalvin Cook or do whatever and just save that money.
Yeah, I mean, they'd have to sign Dalvin Cook, one would think, if he's out there, because Devontae Adams might revolt. You know, I mean, he's been very vocal, you know.
But this gets back to the ultimate test of the running back position. Can you put another guy in who's a lot cheaper and he does, almost the same thing as the guy he's replacing? That's where this whole problem came from anyway. The supply outweighs the demand. So you wonder at what point the Raiders are going to say, fine, we'll remove the tender and we'll save our $10.1 million.
You're the man. Thanks, Mike. Greatly appreciate it. And anytime I could return the favor, you just let me know, please. Anytime.
Thank you, pal.
Right back at you. At Pro Football Talks, Mike Florio. Check him out every single day. PFT Live, as he mentioned, on Peacock. And must follow at Pro Football Talk on Twitter. Catch the Rich Eisen Show every single day on the Roku channel, 12 to 3 Eastern, for free.